how about all of you? Somebody want to maybe give us your testimony, your experience? Does anybody have any questions or issues that you've had that we could talk about on Sabbath that would be helpful to the group? Yes?
Will you be talking water filters or filtration at all?
Tonight, yeah.
Okay.
When you were reading in Genesis, you said there were 2 other names that had meaning. I'm wondering what that was.
If you want to look there, it's in Genesis 4, I think. And it lists 2 of the names. And if anything I've learned about Scripture, there's nothing in there that's not important. Yes, glasses are wonderful for people my age. Okay, so Enoch meant dedicated. So we got that one. His son was Irad. That meant town man. The next guy, Irad's son, was Methuselah. Okay? And, well, Methusiel, actually. And the next guy begat Lamech. And it's interesting that the next one's name means wild man. So get the progression here. You go from dedicated to town man to wild man, and the last one's name means prayer.
The chapter ends with Tubal-Cain, the first blacksmith.
Yes.
Do you know the meaning of his name?
No, not off. Do you know? Does anyone know off the top?
It has Cain in it.
Tubal-Cain. Yes. What Ellen White's comment about that chapter is this. She said, of those who became experts in this world's artisan works, like working metal and all of that, Cain's descendants became great in that. Anything that you could sell, anything that was of a worldly nature. Spiritual values meant nothing to them. But God's people, the Sethites, they remained as farmers and gardeners, most of them, and they did not become proficient in all of what was going on in the artificial world. They didn't care about it, didn't want it. Not that they knew nothing about it. The sad thing is, as you know, Ellen White alluded, I didn't read the rest of Patriarchs and Prophets. Seth's descendants left the valleys, went into the mountains to get away from Cain's descendants. But I left it there. What's the rest of the story? Do you remember what she says about that? After a while, the children of the Sethites started noticing that the daughters of Cain's descendants were beautiful, and they started wanting to intermarry with them, and they did. And the Bible actually describes that. It said they became men of renown because they had the strength, the physical strength and prowess of the Cainites, but they had the intellectual vigor of the Sethites. You put the two together and you got giant, incredible sinners. And that led to what the Bible says, the whole earth became filled with violence and the thoughts of their minds were only evil continually. There was nobody left but Noah. And that, I don't know if that's ever puzzled you. I can't believe in the millions of people there must have been on the planet by then. There were only 8 that were faithful, and even one of those, Ham, was questionable. I've often thought, and this is straying a little bit, surely the 144,000 is symbolic, right? I don't know anymore. And don't that I think I'm one of them. I mean, no one is safe without Christ every moment and being sure that you are following everything the Lord has let you to do. But I'll tell you at this point, I'd be surprised if there's 144,000 at the end of time. If there was only 8 the first time around, I think the Lord will be doing really well to get that many. Anyway.
I'd just like to mention one more thing. I mean, a lot of us probably thought of it. Going into the country is, as you said, is the developed character, Christ-like character. That is, we are in an environment where we are surrounded by God's creation, continually exposed to it. Part of Christ's character is developing the unselfish, serving attitude. Heaven is spending eternity in serving one another. There is not one selfish act. Us going into the country we must realize it's not so much for us. Our benefit is almost incidental to the real purpose to go there, is to serve others.
That's right.
Our homes are to be of a gift to those that we can serve.
It's the Lord's land.
It's the Lord's
We're
land.
His stewards to
There's
bless
an
others.
awesome sermon I mentioned to you by Elder Frizzy, Cities of Refuge. It talks about how to develop a country home for others.
Yeah.
We are to build up cities of refuge out in the country.
I could maybe add to that. I didn't have it in these notes because I knew they were too long already, but one of the things that some people worry about, and that is, I go out in the country and I'm busy trying to build this house and it takes all my time and I'm basically just wasting my time out here. I'm not witnessing to anybody anymore. I'm not really doing the Lord's work and all that. Well, as we read from that Sabbath school thing, that attitude has really hurt God's work in many ways, because if we had just saved our own young people, it would be vastly different. But there's another side of that too. The purpose of a country home is to get you protected and your character built so that you now have the time and the connection with God that you can start a family ministry. And Linda and I believe earnestly that the next step after you just get your place built is, if at all possible, you need to start a family business on your own land or from your own land. Even better, if that family business can be a direct ministry, then you're doing two things at once. And I'll tell you the beauty of it. The reason for it is because the modern society has stolen the father out of the home. And we talked about that just a tiny bit. And now it's stealing the mother. If you go to the country, but you as a dad, your job is still back in wherever it might be, Vancouver or Seattle or wherever. For me, it would have been Kalispell, 55 miles away. You're going to spend even more time away from your family commuting. And I take my hat off to people who are willing to do that just to get their family out there. But if at all possible, that should be a transitional step. And even if you have to take a 50% pay cut, start your own family business if you can. It may seem impossible. People have told us, because we dealt with a lot of families who sent their students to our little academy. We had, by the way, our academy was Tamarack Springs Academy, and we took from 5 to 10 students, max 10, because they lived in our home and in a bunkhouse, and so we were responsible for them all. Linda had to cook food for all of them. Try cooking food for 8 hungry teenagers every meal. It was a lot of work, and I take my hat off to her for doing that. But one of the things parents often said is, we don't know what to do with our kids in the summer. There's child labor laws. And they lived in near this town or that town or wherever, all over the states, and it was, because I would tell them, you've got to keep them busy in the summer. They get themselves in trouble. Well, what do we do? Nobody will employ them. And people told us that. Well, our little girl came along, Rochelle. What was she going to do for work? And if there wasn't any work, there surely wasn't any paid work in the North Fork Valley. Hardly anybody lives there. How are you going to do it? Actually, we found out it's a whole lot easier in a country wilderness setting to get gainful employment for her, and in a way for us, than it was if she had been living in one of the towns. And here's why. I don't know what the rules are in Canada. You all know that. But I know that in the United States, there are child labor laws. However, there's nothing in the law that says a child can't start their own business. They just can't work for some. You can't exploit them, quote unquote, by hiring them to work. And I realize people were exploited at times in the old days, worked in the coal mines and all that. But that day's long gone. So what we did is we told little Rochelle when she was, went to 9, 8 or 9? Because I believe in being an entrepreneur. The best thing we ever did was to run our own family business. And we taught for a while and worked as an employee of the conference, and it was wonderful, and they were great employers, but I wanted to have our own business. So I told Rochelle, I said, you you need to start your own business. And it was Linda's idea, really. Well, what am I going to do? And I had noticed, and she had noticed, really, that down in the towns, and we're 40 miles from the nearest town, but down in the towns, there were all these little florist shops. I think there were like 8 or 9 altogether in the 3 towns in the larger valley, the Flathead Valley, from us. And they all had these cute little baskets and stuff sitting around in there with a little teddy bear in it or a little flower arrangement. You know how these places are. And a lot of them were made in like Malaysia and Vietnam and all these kind of places. They're just wholesaled over here by the shipload. But they're just made out of sticks, really. Well, the North Fork, I don't know if you have it, we have red dogwood here. Do you have that here? It's red dogwood. It's a beautiful bush. It'll grow up 6, 8 feet tall, and it's really bright crimson red, and it's in the dogwood family. It has beautiful little flowers, green leaves. It's very flexible. We have alder. I'm sure an alder was a curse to me till I found out about this, because alder grows everywhere you don't want it, on your roads and everything. And we have willow, and willow grows everywhere too. And this was all junk to me until Linda came up with this wonderful idea. And so I think you can make baskets, and you could maybe sell them to these people in town. So Rochelle, she started making these little baskets. She made wreaths like this, Christmas wreaths. She made swags. I thought a swag was like a bundle of firewood to me. I was a skeptic, to tell you the truth. She made these cute little baskets out of alder and learned to pound all the nails in it. And she would take the little thing over like this, made it like a wishing well. She took this stuff to town. And she said, well, Daddy, now you go in and see if they'll take them. I said, no, I'm not going in. I'll go with you, but you do the talking. She is a very gregarious person, but she was reluctant at first. It's scary for a 9-year-old to go talk to some adult and say, will you buy my basket? What if they'd said, no, that's ugly? I mean, they probably wouldn't say it quite that way, but there's the whole rejection thing. I mean, it's all this stuff. How can you resist? A cute little 9-year-old girl comes in and said, I made this out the North Fork. I think it's kind of cute, and if you put a little flower in there, I think people will buy it. That's what she said. People said, I think you're right. I'll take 5 of those and 6 of those and 8 of those. She went to the next place. She went to the next place. She made thousands and thousands of dollars for her college fund. Finally, what happened, a guy came in with his big wholesale truck from Seattle, which serviced all the places in between and in Kalispell area too, with all these cute little baskets that were made from all over the world. And he walked into one of these florist shops and he saw some of Rochelle's baskets, and he knew that he didn't sell them to these people. So he went and asked, he said, where are you getting those? He said, well, there's this little girl who lives way up in the mountain. She's making these and makes them just out of the brush here in Montana. He said, that's gold. Who is she? He says, I want to buy something. Okay. So they told him. He got a hold of us. I don't think we even had a phone yet, did we? Probably not. He must have written a letter to us. I don't know. And will you come to town and show me your stuff? Long and short of it, she went down there. She showed him her stuff. And by then she had quite a little line of like 10 different things she could make. He said, I'll take 300 of those and 100 of these and 200 of those. Can you do it? And she said, well, I think so. And how am I going to get them to you? He said, no problem. I do this all the time. We were 40 miles from town, still are, but believe it or not, UPS will deliver to our door. Good old UPS. And when they come, they have a deal. If it's set up with a wholesaler, you put all this stuff in their boxes. They supply the boxes, and they will ship it right from there. You don't even have to haul it to town. She was shipping this guy hundreds and hundreds of these. And they're all selling from $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 a piece. Pretty soon she was hiring the kids at the school. And the worst of it, she was hiring Dad. And it became a family joke because because this stuff grows along the roads, and everybody knew everybody in those days, so we would be along the North Fork Road. She would be out there because only she knew which stems and how long and how straight she needed. She'd clip them all and lay them on the ground. It was up to Dad to pick them up, haul them up by the road, and then we called it stripping. You were stripping, you take the leaf and go whoosh, like this to get all the leaves off because she didn't want the leaves on there. And then my neighbors would drive by. Hey, Jerry, what are you doing out there with all that brush? She hired me too. She hired Linda. She made so much by the time she went to college, she had her college fund. It was incredible. She never had to pay anything to somebody because she was too young to work. They don't do that because it was her business. I told her, you pay taxes? And I'll tell you, one of the hardest things Rochelle ever did was write a check for a little girl for hundreds of dollars to the government for taxes. We could have easily gotten away with doing nothing. But I think the Lord honored that. Because years later, I'm still in my thunder from tonight. I was going to tell you what happened to your kids. She went to college. The closest Adventist college to us was Canadian Union College, just right up above Calgary there. So that's where she went. It's Berman University now. She decided she wanted to be a doctor. We didn't have any money to send her to medical school. And I told you too, and I don't want you to think I'm bragging, but a dad has a hard time not doing that. But when we went up there, bless their hearts, they said, well, where'd you go to academy? Well, I went to Tamarack Springs Academy. Well, where's that? Well, it's my parents' school. So all these grades you got are just from your dad? How do we know you know anything? I mean, it was kind of a little in your face. And they said, we want you to take a GED. And I had told her, don't take a GED because it's considered, it's not supposed to be, but it's considered an inferior degree that you do if you just couldn't go to school for some reason. She said, I don't want to. And told her why. Well, how can... Finally, they said, we'll take you on probation for the first semester. If you do okay, then you can be a regular student. Well, she got straight A's. She graduated summa cum laude in 3 years. It doesn't hurt to homeschool your kids.
Amen.
She was serious. She was 19 when she went. She was serious-minded. She couldn't believe the frivolity that was all around her. A lot of kids were there. Somebody else was paying the bill. She was paying her bill with her basket money and her ditch money and all the other stuff she did. We helped her a little. She started earning scholarships. In the end, she wanted to go to medical school. What are we going to do? Montana doesn't have its own medical school because it's just such a small state. At that time, we only had like 800,000 people in the whole state. That's like what, 1/3 of Vancouver? It was nothing. So Montana had made a deal. They had two things. They had the whammy and the witchy. And those are acronyms for like Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho, I think, is what that was the whammy, and I forget what the witchy was. But one of them, you could apply, and you had to write essays and all this sort of stuff, and if you were accepted, you could go to Washington State University Medical School in Seattle, and you only had to pay in-state tuition instead of out-of-state, because we're out-of-state. And that was a help, but it's still a lot of money. Same thing they would be paying if they're in Washington. The whammy was only 6 kids. Those kids, they would pay a certain amount. They would pay the entire tuition, but you had to go to one of 17 pre-selected medical schools in the entire West. And guess what? One of them was Loma Linda. She applied. And I think it was the Lord's will partly, obviously, but part of it was because she lived in the mountains in Montana. Because you're not required to come back, and you don't have to do anything to get that scholarship. You don't have to come back, but they're hoping you'll come back to Montana. And they figured since we'd lived there forever, she probably would. And so they interview you, and the fact that she'd gone on mission trips in Nepal and all the rest, and all of that, long story short, she was selected as one of those 6. And Loma Linda gave her a scholarship too. Between the two, it was $100,000. She got every dime and 50 times more back for all the taxes she ever paid to Montana. If we had told her, it doesn't matter, you can be a little dishonest, you think the Lord would have honored that? No. So the point is, If you move to the country, your kids can have a job easier if you know what to do than if you live in a city. And we were able to help her. Linda helped her. We spent hours and hours pounding little stuff, helping her to learn how to do all that. Actually, every year the problems got easier and easier and easier. Because you learn, by learning to trust the Lord, every time there's something else coming. It was always hard until we put our heart into it. Then the Lord opened the door. I've learned in anything with the Lord, but particularly in country living, generally speaking, the doors aren't open until you pound on them. When you do, they open if it's the right one. The Lord will never let you down. Folks, I got to tell you, I've seen so many friends tried to move to the country, and I'm not God, and I don't know their hearts, but just from their actions, I know it was a little bit like, well, if this works out, we'll do it, but if it doesn't, I'm going to kind of get my old job back. They never last. Because the heart isn't in it. We're only doing this because maybe there's going to be Sunday laws next year. No. You got to do this because I would do this if the Lord didn't come for 1,000 years. It's the best lifestyle for my family and my kids anyway. And if the Lord comes, even better. So, for those of you who have children or grandchildren, never think that moving to the country is something that might not work out for them. I can tell you, though, the only reason I think Rochelle ended up like she did is because Dad didn't just work her to death, and I didn't just work all the time. We climbed mountains together. We canoed together. We floated the river together. We went skiing together. We went on mission trips together. We did everything together. And today, we're still best friends. It's not always that way. I know it doesn't always work out that way. But I think if you put the time in, it does. Yeah.
A question. In country living, she said, go where the houses are not so closely crowded.
Right.
Would you comment on that? Like, she doesn't really detail that. I just wonder how close is she thinking?
Well, I cannot tell you what all these things mean to you, because I'm not a prophet and all that, but I have an opinion on it. Ellen White was a tremendously practical person. She would rather you live 100 feet from the edge of a town where the houses were not too closely packed together than have you live in the middle of town. But boy, if you can, get 70 miles out. That's what she did when she built Sunnyside, when she built Elsheimer, or maybe 10 miles. It all varies. You can be 10 miles from one town and you're in the wilderness. You can be 30 miles from another town and it's sprawling so fast in 5 years it's going to overtake you. So there's no set number. But it's true, you want to be, the criteria is really get a piece where, with God's blessing, you can grow all the food you'd have to have just to live. I mean, all the food you'd have to live. It may be a lot of potatoes and a lot of beans or whatever, squash or whatever you can grow, but you need to be able to grow a complete food supply. You need to have a secure water supply that does not require outside fuel or outside power to pump. It's best if you have a gravity-fed spring. The next best thing is a gravity-fed stream. And the next best thing is a good shallow well. Shallow wells can be dangerous, especially if you're in an area with a lot of pollution. But most of the pioneers dug their own wells. And the water was fine then because somebody hadn't poured 10,000 pounds of fertilizer on it yet. So you need those things, and you need a secure fuel supply so that there's enough firewood on your own place when you can no longer buy firewood or go to the national forest or provincial forest or whatever to keep your home warm, what you need. And that varies. I think in Alabama, you could probably do that on 5 acres, maybe 10 acres. Your problem down there is you're not going to die of cold. You're going to be sweating in the summertime. And no one's ever figured out how to use firewood to make air conditioning. Literally, I mean, it's hard. Air conditioning is far harder than heating your house. We just drove. I wanted to see I've never been through the deep south. I've been there, but I've never driven the back roads. We did that 2 years ago. There's some beautiful places in Alabama and Mississippi, out in the country. Just most of it, I'm telling you, there was a lot of shacks. There was a lot of kind of loose living, I guess we put it that way. But you'd come around a corner and here was a beautiful country estate. It's a simple home, but landscape lawns, beautiful garden, flowers. This was in like late winter. It was beautiful. I talked to people, we'd stop every little town. We took every little black road we could find, stayed off all the main roads. I wanted to see what the real Alabama was like, or Mississippi, or Louisiana. You stop in these little stores, I'll tell you one thing. You'd walk in there and there'd be 6 white people and 7 black people, and they were all total friends. There was no discrimination. It's all in the cities. And I commented on that a little bit. Linda, tell them about the experience you had when you were trying to go in this little store.
Well, I found out to run in a gas station and the store part of it real quick. And I noticed when I got out to go that a gentleman had come out of the door of this store, and I was just getting out of the car, and I just figured he was coming out. And as I got closer, I noticed he was still standing there. And this gentleman, who was one of the black men in that store, was standing there holding the door open for me. I have never been so shocked in my life. He was the most polite person, a gentleman that I have ever met. And he, friendly, nice, treated me like I was just another person, a friend. We'd never, of course, met. But anyway, as we made our trip through the South, I was very impressed with the seeming camaraderie between the groups of people there. And I thought it was great, because you hear so much negative, which to me is so sad and so terrible. But it's, some places at least, it's not as bad as what you hear.
The more out in the country we got, the more it was like that. And land down there is cheap. It's just incredibly cheap. But I wouldn't really want to be there because they have terrible bug problems. But it freezes where I am. Every place on earth, whether it's the desert, the mountains here in BC or Montana, or the deep south, every place has its special set of problems, and it also has its great advantages. One of the great advantages of our area is virtually no bugs. It's just too cold. And the season's too short, it kills them all. It's wonderful. But, well, we have mosquitoes, but only for a short time, because as soon as it frosts, they're gone. Down south, they have horrible bug problems. But people do garden down there. In essence, I learned the way you garden in Alabama, I haven't lived there and I don't know, is you plant a huge garden. The bugs get half of it and you get the other half. And if it's big enough, it doesn't matter, because they can't eat it all. And that's kind of what people said. I mean, they'd have, well, the coons came and took our whole corn patch over here, but we got it over here. I don't know. I think you could build a big fence, but I don't know. Coons are pretty tenacious, yeah.
Do you ever look at your soil under a microscope?
I haven't looked under a microscope. We did have it tested a little bit, and it was perfectly fine. It was just weak on nitrogen and weak on phosphorus and weak. I mean, it's mountain rocky soil. It had everything you need, but not a lot of it. And so we've spent our whole life there building the soil up in our garden. And really, it is wonderful now. Because when we came, I mean, it was brown. And I don't think the topsoil was any thicker than that, where we made our garden. That was below that, it was rocky topsoil and so on. Then it was below that, we had lots of rocks this size. You get down to 2 to 2.5 feet, and it's pure sand and gravel, which has wonderful advantages. We have complete drainage. I'd rather have that than hard pan clay. But we had to pick rocks and all the rest of it, and it really was very discouraging in the beginning. But now, people don't realize after 35 years, and we now run a farmer's market at our place in a little gazebo. It's a witness. We don't do it for money. We make a little bit, but we're really doing it to draw people to see what Seventh Adventists actually live like and what we believe in. And people ask us, why do you, because we live in an area everybody hunts. Why are you vegetarians? I mean, I had a guy come, how do you get your vitamin B12? How do you even know that, to ask? You know, most Adventists are all worried about their vitamin B12. Linda and I don't have any trouble with that. We've been vegan for years. I mean, mostly. We eat a little when we're out, and So now people will come to our farmer's market and they'll go out in our garden, because sometimes they want something that's actually out there and they love it. You go out and pull it right out of the garden and give it to them. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And they look at this soil and they'll say, man, you guys have such beautiful soil down here. And it's like, I don't even say, you don't know what happened. But I'll show you a picture tonight. I dug a hole to plant a fruit tree. We're trying to grow a few outside. I've never been very successful. The bottom is just full of rocks, and there are no rocks that I put there. And then you'll see the old North Fork, and above that is almost a foot of literally black soil. And it's like, wow. You know, if you persist, the Lord will work with you, but it's compost. I mean, we have huge compost piles, and keep pouring it on year after year after year. So I think now actually our soil's pretty good, and it's got lots and lots of humus in it. It has lots of worms in it we didn't have before and all that, but that's a good idea. I've never put it under a microscope.
Some of us have mountain clay, and at least at my place, I've been working on it for 17 years, and it's still mountain clay. How to turn that into good soil, we're still working on that.
How far does the clay go down? Endless?
Down to rock. Yeah, it's thick mountain clay. It's like trying to grow a garden in a clay pot. You know, it's.
I'm not an expert. I mean, we've got a lot of experience in alpine gardening, but from what I understand, good garden soil has 1/3 clay, 1/3, and about 1/3 sand or small rocks, and the other third needs to be organic humus-like material, all mixed together. So eventually, but that's only going to be this much. Below that's still going to be clay, and so you may have a drainage problem. See, we never had a drainage problem because the water just goes.
We're on a south-facing slope, so it
runs away.
It drains quite good that way. But I was going to say, when Jerry started looking for good soil, it just so happened where those 7 springs came down off the side of the mountain, it had collected this black sediment that had been collecting ever since Noah had piled up there. And so Jerry dug all that black dirt up and put it in his greenhouses and his gardens, and that definitely was a big boost to your
One of our greenhouses
soil
has
problem.
2,000 contractor wheelbarrow loads, all dug by hand, wheeled into there, and boy,
And I helped dig some of that. I still remember. Yeah, there was a lot of wheelbarrowing and shoveling.